just take 30 seconds. It's awkward when you come into this space once the program has started because everybody's looking at you as you walk across. So I'm going to just give 30 seconds for anybody who's over here and wants to come on across because, of course, the seats are over here and people are coming in from over here. So we'll just give you 30 seconds to be seated and we'll begin. And that means y'all have to talk to each other so you're not all looking at the folks walking in the door. Well, good afternoon again. It is a joy and a gift for me to welcome you all to Second Presbyterian Church and to an important conversation about what is both an urgent and a significant issue in our community, in our city, and indeed in our state. I'm grateful to each of the speakers who will be sharing their passion and expertise, and I'm grateful to have such a wonderful turnout from the community and from our congregation. Grateful to each of you for being here. My name is Chris Henry, and it's my privilege to serve as senior pastor here at Second Presbyterian Church. You'll be introduced to all of our panelists in a bit. I particularly want to welcome Judith Thomas, our Deputy Mayor for Neighborhood Engagement, who is right here. And yes, welcome, Judith. And Jeff Bennett, who is our Deputy Mayor for Community Development. Welcome. It is, I think, worth briefly noting that you are gathered this afternoon in a church, in a sacred space of worship and witness, and I'd like to suggest that the place we're meeting today is not incidental to the reason we've gathered, at least not for people of faith. Quick personal story. 15 years ago, Dr. Peter Story, who was the former United Methodist bishop in Johannesburg and Soweto, South Africa, preached the baccalaureate sermon for the graduating class of Duke Divinity School. I was an undergraduate at the time, but I was beginning to discern a call to ministry, and I knew a bit about Peter's story. And so I snuck into the back of the Duke Chapel to hear a man of courage and faith deliver this sermon to graduating divinity students. Bishop Story was a leader in the faith-based opposition to the apartheid government and its oppressive racist policies, first as a pastor in Cape Town, and then as chaplain to Nelson Mandela and the other prisoners on Robben Island. The whole sermon was inspiring that day, but I'll never forget Dr. Story's sage and prophetic call to these seminary graduates as he closed his sermon. With a bit of urgency and more than a bit of emotion, he said this: "Until you lead your congregation to engage with the real world, your pastoring will be mere pampering. Your proclamation will be a religious form of talking to yourself. You must resist with all your might the temptation to play church while the world bleeds." Playing church while the world bleeds, failing to engage the needs around us, talking only to ourselves. I think we're all familiar with the temptations that Dr. Story described. Indeed, you don't have to look very far to see them lived out, and we can understand why. There is a comforting appeal to the understanding of spirituality as a kind of retreat from the complexities and struggles of the real world. There is safety to be found in insulating and thereby isolating ourselves. And this kind of sectarian withdrawal is right at home in the carved-up tribalism of our current socio-political reality. The world is complicated and messy, and it is tempting for our people to gather weekly, or I might say for most of my folks these days, monthly, and pat ourselves on the back for being good religious people. Keep the rituals, play church. I have no interest in that approach to ministry, which is ultimately both fruitless and pointless. People are hurting, and we all know that. We know that many families who are seeking assistance from our food pantry just below you and others like it have at least one adult in the household working full-time, working hard, providing services we call essential and all rely on, and not making enough money to buy groceries for their families. And so demand for support continues to soar, and many rely on the donations of others just to survive. And certainly we are called to donate. We are called to give, to support, to assist those who need it the most. We are called to the kind of charity that churches and other religious organizations have always been most comfortable providing. But we're called to more than that. We must also advocate for change at a systemic level. Hardworking people should be able to provide for their families. All people deserve the dignity of a fair wage for hard work. No person should live in inadequate or deplorable conditions while derelict or absentee landlords make profits. Justice demands it. There is perhaps no better public advocate in our scriptural tradition than the prophet Jeremiah. He spoke at a time when the kingdom of Judah was gaining prosperity on the backs of the poor, at a time when King Jehoiakim was expanding his palace, and the wealthy elite were building new homes, while the very laborers of these massive projects went underpaid. Jeremiah spoke at a time when the gulf between rich and poor was already vast but constantly growing. And speaking at such a time as this, he reminded the powerful of their call to treat their workers with justice and fairness. His words echo through the centuries and fall heavy on my ears today as I think about the home in which I live and the neighbors I'm called to love. The prophet writes, "Woe to him who builds his house by unrighteousness and his upper rooms by injustice, who makes his neighbors work for nothing and does not give them their wages, who says, 'I will build myself a spacious house with large rooms.' Are you a king because you compete in cedar? Did your father not eat and drink and do justice and righteousness? Did he not judge the cause of the poor and needy, and it was well? Is this not to know me, says the Lord? But your eyes and hearts are on your dishonest gain, shedding innocent blood, practicing oppression and violence." Or as Eugene Peterson's The Message captures that final phrase, "All you think about is yourselves, taking advantage of the weak and bulldozing your way, bullying your neighbors." Jeremiah clearly condemns people of faith who play church while the world bleeds. And I believe it is time for people of faith in our city, our state, to join together and say that we stand for justice. We stand for compassion. We stand for equity. For too long, the religious community has silently assented to a definition of morality that is too narrow in scope to be called scriptural. That is, economic justice is a core biblical issue. Budgets and bills are moral documents. For people of faith to ignore the plight of our neighbors and retreat from working on their behalf is spiritual malfeasance. God asks more of us than that. Faith demands more of us than that. So we at Second Church are here to listen and to learn. And we are here because our faith demands response to the needs of our neighbors. We welcome you to Second Presbyterian Church.
Should have figured this out beforehand. Everyone, it is such an honor to be here with you this afternoon. I recognize many faces that my organization, Patchwork Indy, has worked with on various housing justice initiatives on the north side. My name is Claire Holba, and I am the executive director of Patchwork Indy. Reverend Henry, thank you for such incredible opening remarks. I would first like to begin this afternoon by inviting up Deputy Mayor of Community Development, Jeff Bennett. And I would first like to thank Deputy Mayor Bennett for the incredible allyship and support that he has offered to Patchwork and to the community here on the north side, to the neighborhood ambassadors, as we've sought to better the conditions of the community and apartment complexes on the north side. Deputy Mayor Bennett?
Claire, thank you. And gosh, it's so great to see a full room on a Sunday afternoon. This is an awesome turnout. I think it speaks to the urgency of the issues that we're trying to confront. I want to say thank you again to Pastor Chris for hosting. It's totally appropriate for Second Pres to play a leadership role. The church has, throughout its history, played such a role in our city. And congregations do community development. We don't often recognize that. We think about nonprofits and housing specialists and things like that. But churches were among our first community development organizations in this city and across this country. So thank you for being a convener here today. And Claire, thank you to Patchwork Indy and to Bruce Garrison. He was floating around and I don't know where he landed. But thank you, Bruce, for the invitation to be here today and for putting this together. I think this should not be, and I don't think it's intended to be, the last conversation on this topic, or on these topics, I should say plural. You will soon be hearing from speakers with far more expertise than I have. I have worked on community development issues from a nonprofit angle, from a government perspective for many years, but I learn new things every day from the speakers that you're going to hear from over the course of the next hour or so. So thank you in advance to them, and thank you to our partners who are staffing around the perimeter of the room today. I hope you'll avail yourselves of the information that they have to provide. Issues like evictions and eviction prevention and fair housing and tenants' rights and the creation and preservation of affordable housing and housing regulation and good and bad landlords, these are not new issues. We are now in sort of the end of a generation where we've had 2 recessions and a worldwide pandemic. And I would say these issues that we've listed and that we'll talk about today have become much more acute over the past few years, but they are not new issues. But if you could think about a household or a family that has grown up over the past 20 years, being hit in 2001 with a recession, being hit again in 2008 with a recession that lasted, by some accounts, 7 years, and then for the last 2 years to be hit by the things that we are still trying to emerge from, the global pandemic and the resultant economic fallout. The cards seem to be stacked against our most vulnerable residents and families. There are and one of the things that Pastor Chris said just a moment ago really resonated with me. We can't separate those issues of housing from other issues that are present in the community. Employment, access to opportunity, low wages across our city and state and frankly our nation. For jobs that used to be middle-class jobs, they just don't pay enough anymore to afford the cost of living. Those things are inseparable, and they all sort of overlap, and it's like an onion, and trying to peel it apart can get frustrating and upsetting and confusing. But there are good things happening in our city, and you're going to hear about some of those things in just a few moments. And there are things that we can do as residents, as practitioners, as just concerned citizens. Maybe no better example than the advocacy that has gone on around Lakeside Point for many years, much longer than the city's really been involved. Residents, stakeholders, nonprofit organizations took the lead where an apartment manager or an apartment owner should have been taking the lead to be on the lookout for the best interests of the residents who were impacted by the living conditions there. And we're not done yet at Lakeside Point, but it certainly seems to be on a much better trajectory than it has been at any time over the last 5 years at least. There's much more work to do. As I think most of you know, the owners of the former owners of Lakeside Point owned at one point in time at least 8 properties across Marion County. So we continue to try to get to the bottom of those ownership situations. We're working very closely with Citizens Energy, who's also trying to get to the bottom of those issues. So thank you, Mike, for being here today on behalf of Citizens. And while Lakeside is probably the most visible situation of its kind, certainly on the north side of Indianapolis, on every single day, on any given day, each of us who are working on these issues are working on smaller scale lakeside points across the city of Indianapolis, where there is a tenant who's being victimized by a landlord, where there are fair housing issues being raised and hopefully addressed, where there are issues of regulatory authority, whether at the city, the county, or the state level. Those are the things that we're doing all day, every day. And so while you may not see it, certainly most of our work doesn't make the news on a nightly basis. Know that we're there, and we are available to you if you have questions about the work that we're doing or the property that you see when you're driving to work, or a member of your church that is struggling with issues that they don't seem to be able to address on their own. I am, again, grateful for all of your willingness to be here today and to engage in some of these conversations. When we can meet as a group, we can come up with new ideas, and we can take those ideas back to City Hall and see how they might implement in the form of policy. So I'm really grateful to be able to kick things off today. I'll turn it back over to you, Claire, and we'll hear from our speakers and our panelists and have a good discussion the rest of the afternoon. Thank you so much for letting me be here today.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bennett. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers who hold real expertise on the issues and possible solutions that we're here to talk about today. Before we introduce these speakers, we're first going to begin by taking a moment to center ourselves on the reason why we're here. The following clips that you will view in a few minutes depict some of the very real situations that tenants, our neighbors across Indiana, are facing. I would like to thank WTHR for making these clips accessible for us and for their continuous coverage of the challenges we face at Lakeside Point and elsewhere. Thank you.
County Health Department was back out at a troubled Indianapolis apartment complex today, taking yet another complaint about the living conditions there. Meanwhile, Indiana's Attorney General is trying to take some action to help. Our Dustin Grove looked into whether anyone is making any progress.
In the last 6 months, the Marion County Health Department has taken 107 complaints about the property here on the north side. They also sent us 42 pages of violation notices, everything from leaking pipes to mold to no air conditioning over the summer and no heat as recently as last week. There have also been at least 21 fires here so far this year, also as recently as last week. Tenants have told us they are fed up. One of them told me today he's scared to get into his bathtub because of the hole in his ceiling. Earlier this fall, the Indiana Attorney General sued the property owner, asking a judge to appoint a third party to take over. But the judge ordered mediation instead. That was about 3 months ago. I asked the AG's office today where things stand, and in a statement, here's what a spokesperson said. The parties are currently in the process of scheduling a mediation in an effort to resolve all outstanding issues before the end of the year. Meanwhile, the people who live here at Lakeside Point continue to wait.
And we reached out to the apartment complex to hear its side of the story. In an email, an employee who wanted to remain anonymous told us, quote, "We are still here every day working very hard with what we have left. We are very concerned about our tenants and the condition of the property, but it's out of our hands. We are extremely short-staffed." They went on to say, without support or any type of immediate solution to our several requests for help, we are out of options. You can read that entire statement online at WTHR.com.
What is life like in the day-to-day as a resident?
There's supposed to be another clip playing, but if not, we can continue.
Yeah, tenants at Lakeside Point and Nora are saying that burst pipes and flooding have become.
Well, in that clip, hopefully you were able to center yourselves and begin again to understand the very, very real scenarios that are playing out throughout our city and our state. We will now invite our first guest speaker up, Miss Amy Nelson. Amy is the Executive Director at the Fair Housing Center of Central Indiana. The mission of the Fair Housing Center is to ensure equal housing opportunities by eliminating housing discrimination through advocacy, enforcement, education, and outreach. The FHCCI has a service area of 24 counties in central Indiana, reaching a population of over 2.5 million. They work to prevent housing discrimination through advocacy, education, inclusive communities, and public policy programs. They conduct investigations to uncover these violations of fair housing laws and to file enforcement actions to stop identifying discriminatory practices, or to stop identified discriminatory practices. Amy, welcome, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. So if my slides could be pulled up, and I might come stand by you. It's hard to see what you're actually looking at from over there. So next slide. My name is Amy Nelson. I'm the Executive Director of the Fair Housing Center of Central Indiana. Thank you so much for this great crowd here today. I have a tough job of, in 15 minutes or less, trying to set up the housing problem we have here in Marion County. And I am going to, next slide, only focus on rental issues. We have a staggering problem when it comes to home ownership as well. If you are not aware, the white home ownership rate in Marion County is 65%. The black home ownership rate is only 34%. The biggest gap that we have. If you want to learn more about mortgage lending problems here in our county, pick up this report that is over on our table over there, or invite me back, and we will certainly spend some time talking about that. Fair Housing Center, I'm not going to spend much time on us. We're a nonprofit advocacy-based organization here in Indianapolis. We're the only one in Indiana, staff of 5, by the way, and that's it. States around us all have several. We're it in Indiana, and we're actually celebrating our 10th anniversary here this year. Next slide. So nothing I say today is legal advice. I always need to point that out. I have been in fair housing since 1997. I have got a whole lot of opinions on things, but none of them are legal opinions. So don't use that as legal advice. You need legal advice, please go get an attorney. Okay, what I am here today is to set up our housing problem for the great folks who come after me who are going to dig into these topics just a little bit more. It is the Fair Housing Center's opinion that the state of Indiana, as well as the city of Indianapolis, has an affordability problem, it has a substandard housing problem, it has an eviction crisis, and it has a discrimination problem. And all of that was only exacerbated during the pandemic, only made worse. It's been there. It's been there for a long time. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we got there, but this is nothing new. It's been there. It's just that people without power have been unable to be heard for a long, long time. Next slide. So let's set this up a little bit. Let's start with discrimination. Housing discrimination is prevalent across our city, across our state, across our nation. The Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968, made it unlawful to discriminate based upon race, color, national origin, religion, gender, disability, or the presence of children in the home. It did not correct the problems that had already been put in place previous to 1968 around racial covenants, segregation, redlining, all of these forces that have led to the problems that we are at here today. And the Fair Housing Act itself is a truly phenomenal civil rights law. One of the strongest civil rights laws this country has ever passed. But it's never had the true support of government, legislatures, and the courts in order to do what it is supposed to do. So to give you some data, where are we here in Marion County? Again, looking at Marion County. We had issued a report. You can go to our reports page on our website to view this much longer report where we have county-by-county breakouts. But from 2000 to 2018, there were, across the state of Indiana, about 3,900 housing discrimination complaints filed, and that is very, very low. There are definitely a lot more housing discrimination complaints that could have been filed, but people didn't know what to do. They didn't know where to go. They were afraid of speaking up, afraid of being retaliated against and losing what housing that they might have. Very much an underreported number. Here in Marion County, of that total, 785 occurred here in our county during that time period. Of those, overwhelmingly, they were race-based complaints. Then followed by disability, national origin, children in the home, religion, color, and then retaliation. Department of Justice also stepped in here in our state several different times to initiate its own actions, its own claims, above and beyond what was filed with administrative agencies. 11 of those were filed, including one here in Marion County. And then my organization that I got up and running 10 years ago through 2019, separate from all this complaints, had filed 29 enforcement actions, 11 of which were based here in Marion County. Next slide. That's very quick on discrimination. Affordability. Affordability is a problem, and my colleague Andrew Bradley is likely going to come later to talk about a new report that was released here on Friday. It's Fair Housing Month, by the way, so it's been a busy month. Affordability. We have a huge affordability problem here. Each year, the National Low-Income Housing Coalition issues a report where it looks at that data, like what would it take for somebody to be able to afford a basic two-bedroom apartment? To live here in Indianapolis, that means $18.19 an hour is what you need to be making to be able to afford a basic two-bedroom apartment. $18.19. What's our current minimum wage? $7.25. We haven't touched it. States around us, I think all the states but Kentucky, Andrew might know better, have changed their minimum wage. We have not changed our minimum wage. Next slide. Evictions. This has been referenced. Indianapolis, state of Indiana, has a huge eviction crisis. Those of you who listen to NPR heard a couple years ago, NPR ranked Indiana the state most friendliest to landlords. What does that mean? That means Indianapolis was ranked 14th highest in the country for its rate of eviction filing. Second highest in the country for the sheer volume of evictions that were being filed, only behind New York City. Think about that. Only behind New York City. We got a problem here. Since the start of the pandemic, and you can go on sites like Eviction Lab and get this data yourself. Since the start of the pandemic, there have been nearly 35,000 eviction filings. If anybody tells you people were not being evicted during the COVID pandemic, they haven't done their research. There were lots of evictions happening during the COVID pandemic. Lots of evictions. 37% of the evictions here in Marion County come back to only 100 properties who are doing the vast majority of the evicting. Next slide. We have a substandard housing problem. And I'm going to tell my slide person here to just slowly advance here until I tell you to stop. We have a significant substandard housing problem. Just keep going. We have story after story and prompts to the news services in our city who are ensuring that all voices are being heard on this topic, because it is story after story after story about substandard housing conditions. If you don't make $18.19 an hour and one day your car breaks down and you need that car to get to work because our transportation system isn't very good, what are you going to do? How are you going to pay rent in doing that? One flat tire can spiral somebody into losing their housing. and force them into substandard housing conditions. Lakeside Point, I wish Lakeside Point was the only such property in the city of Indianapolis. There are so many of those properties, and people are afraid to speak up because if they do, the way the law is now, and they're retaliated against, the burden is completely on them to have to address it in court. That was taken away by the Indiana General Assembly. Next slide. How do we get here? It is the Fair Housing Center's position that the state of Indiana has passed over about the last 10 years a series of bills that have all been friendly to housing providers and against tenants. And again, we're here talking rental today. We're going to have a whole another session about home ownership, but we're here talking rental today. And very quickly here, because I'm running out of time, there have been bills passed that have taken away the ability of cities to be able to conduct effective inspections to ensure housing is safe. That has been taken away from cities to be able to do that. They have taken away the ability of cities to mandate affordable housing development. They took that away because Bloomington was looking to do that. They have targeted fair housing and taken away rights that individuals have in other states under fair housing laws. We do not have here because they took that away. They took away the fact the city was debating protection for individuals using Section 8 and being denied housing solely because they were going to use a voucher. Still had to qualify for the housing. They took that away on doing that. Then there was 148. The city of Indianapolis, in very trying to provide some very basic, this was nowhere near a tenant bill of rights, very basic tenant rights, including protection from retaliation. The city ended up being preempted. And basically 148 preempted most housing code as a result of that. Next slide. So that's what sets us up here today. On our website's public policy page, fhcci.org, go to our public policy page. We have a bad bills list, bad bills that have been passed that need to be changed. Many of those I referenced there, but not all of them. There's been several others. We need to have changes made in this area. I know you're going to hear from Senator Qaddoura a little bit later. I saw him come in, some of the work that he was trying to do. But very often the bills that need to be heard cannot get past the committee chairs. In order to be heard, we need all of you being involved in demanding that our General Assembly represent everybody and allow these bills to be heard to ensure that everybody has a chance to affordable, safe housing free from discrimination. Fair Housing Center, I have some materials on our table over there. We've got a website. It's Fair Housing Month. We got an exhibit on redlining down at the Central Library. Please go see that before the end of the month. And I'll be around to answer any other questions. Okay? Thanks. And I should say, for once, it's good to be short.
Thank you, Amy. You painted a very broad brush picture of the many challenges that we're facing. We'll now take a moment to watch a short video of resident testimony and experiences. While this video takes place at Lakeside Point, as Amy alluded to, Lakeside is certainly not the only place that these issues are happening. I would like to note that the residents requested that their faces be blurred for fear of retaliation and backlash against them speaking to their situation.
What is life like in the day-to-day as a resident? It seems reasonable to think that when an emergency maintenance issue arises, no heat, no water, no AC, one goes to the office and reports the issue. one might need to follow up, but emergency issues will be dealt with promptly. Then, if in the off chance a problem persists, one tells the health department, and then the issue will be resolved. Melee has lived with her children at Lakeside Point for a little over a year.
So since I moved in, there was no electricity 2 times, and my furnace was broken 3 times now. And I have water problem 3 times. Sometimes people will come over and check it out and fix it. Sometimes they don't when I call. I would go over to the office and tell them, or I would make phone calls.
At the time of filming, Melee had 4 unaddressed issues in her apartment. No heat, the hot water into the tub would not turn off and ran continually. Only 2 burners on the stove worked, and the toilet did not flush functionally. Melee has gone almost a month without heat in the dead of winter. Her issues had been reported to the office and the health department. Pei Tu has lived with his family at Lakeside Point for almost 10 years.
Sometimes I don't have water. We try to report, call the people 2-3 times. They came, fixed it. Sometimes they don't. They checked and said we'll come back, and nothing was being done. There was a time when a pipe broke in between our living room and the bathroom, and we didn't have water at all during those times. For about 2 months, it took them forever until they come fix it up, like very good and not broke anymore. And those 2 months, when they come tape it, I have water. When they don't, I don't. During those time, my living room is all flooded. One of my bedrooms is all flooded, so we all have to sleep in the other bedroom that is not flooded and it was dried. I had to drag the electric using a plug from the hallway and then drag it back in the house to cook and use it for the lights and other stuff that needs electric.
For one summer, he had no AC for a month.
It's not our house, it's not our apartment, it's theirs. Something broke, we go and tell them, they don't come fix it. There is nothing very much that we could do. We just had to endure it and be patient and keep going. I want them to respond a little faster to our problems when we can tell them when we phone calls.
And many of these problems persist for long periods of time in court with the health department. So why don't residents just move?
I like it here, and so when you move, you've got to report your new address, get a new ID, at the electric company, wherever it is, you've got to report everything, the changes, and my kids also, they like schools here, and if I move, it would also be hard for them. And another reason is you got to move stuff, all your furnitures, and it's hard to move.
You are not watching this today because these are isolated incidents for tenants in Indiana. And in these conditions, a tenant can never not pay rent, even when having to financially compensate for the lack of legally required landlord provisions by using energy-expensive space heaters, going other places to shower, or purchasing water. All of this is taking on additional monetary and time costs. If rent is not paid, they face the very real threat of eviction.
You deserve better to live in another place that's better than this.
Our next guest speaker will be Andy Beck. Andy is the manager for the city's Tenant Advocate Program, also known as TAP. Andy and his wife Lauren have lived in the near East Side neighborhood cottage home for 16 years. They have 2 sons and enjoy biking around downtown and to the boys' soccer games. Andy previously worked for the Keffer Institute as the Community Land Trust Coordinator under their program that he co-founded, Homes for All Indy. Andy is a passionate community development practitioner and formalized that in 2020 with a Master of Urban Design degree from the Ball State College of Architecture and Planning. We will conduct this discussion via an interview format. Hopefully this is, okay, good. Hi, Andy. We're so grateful to have you here today. Before we segue into looking at what solutions might begin to look like now that we've received this very broad brushstroke of the landscape here, we're wondering if you can speak to us a bit about the historical context that has gotten us to this situation and point today.
Sure. As Deputy Mayor Bennett mentioned earlier, the problems of housing and lack of basic human rights of safe, affordable housing. It's been going on for decades, 400 years, 2,000 years. There's always been whether it's through refugees or gentrification and displacement, there has always been a forced migration of poor folks. So yeah, it goes way back.
Yes. Thank you. Can you begin also by talking a bit about your work through the Tenant Advocate Program, also known as TAP, and how you see the role of tenants in propelling the change that we need?
Sure. So the Tenant Advocate Program is, I'll give you a little basic information about the program. I'm the manager of the program. I work for the city, have a contract with the city, work a lot with Deputy Mayor Bennett, and then the Office of Public Health and Safety and the folks there. The main tasks or objectives are, we have several groups of lawyers at eviction courts and hearing days. Jeremy, are you here? You texted me earlier. Jeremy Pilkington from the Neighborhood Christian Legal Clinic is one of our attorneys that we have in court. So we have that team out giving free legal advice to tenants as they come in for their eviction hearings. And then we have a team of tenant navigators, and those folks are there to help people through the process, through the paperwork, help people apply for the Indy rental assistance program, and just go through some of that administrative stuff to let the attorneys practice law and give their legal advice. So that's kind of the two main points of the program. Is right now we're in a fairly reactive state, getting to eviction court on hearing days. So we're there when folks are coming in and needing help, needing advice, needing some of them need a basic understanding of their rights or lack of rights in Indiana.
And in a moment, I want to get to your work with the Community Land Trust. But as we're watching videos and have personal experiences with just the injustice that tenants are facing, could you speak a little bit about the tenants' roles and perhaps maybe speak to the way that a tenant union could assist to change some of the issues that we're facing?
Sure. In a lot of other states, so Homes for All Indy is part of a national campaign out of New York City called Homes for All. A lot of our other chapters across the country were formed by tenants unions. Tenants coming together, typically low-income renters, coming together for the sake of solidarity and support and fighting for themselves and their community. To me, there's a phrase that the community will take care of the community. I think that's the role that tenant unions can play and do play in Indianapolis. But I think that organizing, storytelling, solidarity, and coming together to fight for the cause creates a strong front and a stronger side on the tenant side. A lot of the larger tenant unions across the country have changed state policy by showing up and demanding it, or change local policy also. Winning victories on rent control. There's a policy called good cause eviction, where if you're being evicted, it has to be for a good reason. It can't just be because of the whims of a landlord. So a variety of those policy wins nationally have come from the strength of tenants and organizing tenants. And that brings up something I wanted to mention. I want to commend Patchwork and Claire for, I don't think Patchwork started as a housing justice organization.
Absolutely
So,
not.
I think a lot of times when you work in other spaces of justice, you find housing injustice. So thanks to Patchwork and you, Claire, for being flexible and not coming in with a prescribed programming. Maybe you did, but then being flexible enough to actually meet the needs of the folks that you're working with. So if you're working in the refugee and immigrant space, you're going to run into housing problems. If you work in racial equity, you're going to run into housing problems. If you work in gender equity, you're going to run into housing. If you work in education, children's educational attainment, you're going to run into housing. Deputy Mayor Bennett mentioned workforce efficiencies. You're going to get better workforce results with stable, affordable, and safe housing. So there's a wide variety of issues. And so, yeah, again, commend you guys for being flexible enough to change and react and shift to the needs of the folks you're trying to reach.
Thank you, Andy. And I'd love to even expand that and recognize some of the many other players here that also addressed what was an issue and adapted. The Nora Neighborhood Ambassadors has been a huge part of this grassroots community effort to come forward as members of faith and to respond. We're here at Second Pres because those from the faith community are responding. And so, as you alluded to, it's absolutely it's going to take a village, right? So yes, thank you for your remarks on that. I'd love to shift, and you and I had a chance to talk a little bit before, and you had mentioned what you believe is sort of kind of the root issue with the housing challenges that we have in Indiana. And that's largely coming from the supply side, I believe, is what you said. And so would you be able to speak a little bit to that and what you see as a solution?
Sure. Several years prior, most of my work was on the supply side of affordable housing. So not the renter's rights side, but focused on changing implementation of affordable housing and the way that development happens. Homes for All Indy, we have a project, Community Land Trust Project, and I could go on for hours, but I will keep it short. Community Land Trust is typically permanently affordable homes. So instead of that affordability period eclipsing after 5, 15 years, 30 years, 50 years, it's maintained affordability for 99 years or 198 years. The other piece of that that speaks to the tenant's power and the tenant's determining their own future is the best practice of a community land trust is that the board of governance is 2/3 community members, 1/3 low-income folks that qualify for the affordable housing, so that their interests are at the decision-making table and they are driving for their needs, hopefully. The supply side, Amy mentioned it earlier. We are severely lacking affordable housing for very low-income people, extremely low-income people. Lots of kind of target demographics there that we don't have a lot for. My team that deals with folks getting evicted, trying to help them when we can't help them. we would love to be able to point them in the direction of rentals that they could afford, but we really don't have that. We have, some wait lists and some limited opportunities in that space. So I think we need 100,000 or so very low-income rental units in Marion County. So lacking a lot.
And so if I'm hearing you, it's sort of these two tracks, right? So this idea of a community land trust is that you have this permanent affordability, 99-year or 198-year commitments at a time. And then the other aspect is this collective ownership or collective governance.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, I get excited to hear this because when you're working in this space, it's easy to get overwhelmed with the obstacles at hand. And so to hear of solutions is energizing. Now, has this model been employed in other places? Do we see spaces where this works across the state or country?
Yeah, not in the state. We're working on, Indianapolis will have either the first or second community land trust in Indiana. South Bend, we're kind of racing with them. There's over 300 operating in the United States right now, so it's a proven model. Internationally, there's community land trusts. The first community land trust in the United States was created as more of a civil rights exercise for black farmers around Atlanta, Georgia, that were kept from owning land in a variety of ways, legally and extra legally. So they formed a community land trust as a way to collectively own land, because that was going to be the only way that they could own land.
Great, thank you for sharing that. Before we finish, is there anything else that you would like to share, and how can the community get involved? How can all of us here get involved in the work that you're doing and the work the city and other organizations are doing?
I would say thank you for coming and listening and being engaged in this way. Continue to look and read. Continue to challenge your own expectations and beliefs. I was raised that, as a lot of Americans were, that, home ownership is the way to go, and homeowners are a more valuable member of the community, and owning property means something that you've succeeded and have excelled. I invite you to challenge that narrative, that you have to have a certain amount of money to be a valuable member of your community. And as far as getting involved, please look up Fair Housing. Amy's organization does a wonderful job. Look up Homes for All Indy. My friend Dee's coming on a little bit later, so track down his organization and get on a mailing list, sign up to Homes for All Indy, has several working groups. Come to the meetings, learn, provide your voice.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Andy.
Thanks.
All right. Our final portion of the summit will be a continued discussion of the solutions that we can engage in to move forward. We will have a panel discussion moderated by Bruce Garrison. Bruce is the chair of the board for Patchwork Indy and is engaged in a variety of nonprofit organizations throughout the city of Indianapolis. Let's welcome Bruce.
Thank you so much. When I stood up and looked around, it's a spring day. People aren't supposed to be coming to stuff like this on a day like this. So thank you very much. There's nothing like having your expectations enormously exceeded to feel pretty good about the day. Before we get into this, I just wanted to take a moment. There's been a committee of people who have been involved in the conversations and the process from several churches, several organizations. If you're here, I'm not going to try to name everybody because I know I'll mess up, But if you have been on all those Zoom calls, I actually met some of the people face to face for the first time today. Would you mind standing up so everybody can just say thank you for the efforts that you put in and all the work and conversations that have gone on? I know it's not just Betty, it's several people. There we are. Thank you. I have to say I'm very pleased with the panel that we've been able to pull together. This is kind of like a superstar panel. And I'm just going to ask you to come up. Lyn and Fady, I'll ask you to be on this side. Claire, you may have to. Sorry. No, you can stay there. Dee, I'll have you over here too, and Andrew will put you over here. Lyn Cheang is our first panelist. She is the real estate and housing reporter at the Indianapolis Star, where she covers evictions, housing affordability, rental assistance, neighborhood change and gentrification, how renters and homeowners alike are affected by changing in the housing market across the state. She has reported on everything from tenants' rights to how nonprofit landlords enjoy tax breaks, while residents suffer from badly maintained apartments, to how Indiana's high evictions are driven by corporate out-of-state landlords. Over here on this side is Senator Fady Qaddoura. Fady was elected to be the representative of Indiana Senate District 30 in November of 2020. Before that, he has been involved in numerous aspects of public service. Most recently, he was the controller and CFO for the city of Indianapolis, which started in 2016. And I have to say that in every phase of the process regarding Lakeside Point, Fady has been intimately and directly involved in working with us to find solutions, to make people accountable, and we are very grateful for the work that he has done. Then back here on this side is Dee Ross, who is the founder and CEO of the Ross Foundation. I'm really interested to hear Dee speak because he's doing some interesting things with tenant unions and beginning to give people who are actually facing these situations a voice, and how they themselves begin to become the solution to the problems that we are all becoming aware around us. And then finally on this side is Andrew Bradley. Andrew is the Policy Director for Prosperity Indiana, which is the statewide association for community economic development. He is a policy director. He works with policymakers. He is involved in legislation conversations. He convenes policy discussions. In fact, several of us were at a thing that he held just this past Thursday regarding a study that just came out of Notre Dame. And he also plays a very major role in the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition, which we will get to eventually today. So those are the four people that we have been able to get into the room, and we're going to kind of do some panel discussion. And as Claire said, we want to start thinking about solutions. Lyn has been very helpful in having conversations with me to kind of just frame this. And one of the major issues we want to talk about today is accountability. Accountability both of landlords and of local politicians who kind of just let stuff keep falling through the cracks over and over and over. So, Lyn, I'm going to come to you first. But before I do that, I don't think anybody on the panel or anyone in the audience will take issue with me pausing for just a second. I just want to publicly acknowledge and thank you for the amazing work you continue to do with the Indianapolis Star. Your compelling reporting keeps these issues in front of everybody. So thank you. My parents in their mid-80s who have no real idea about these issues know that Lyn Cheang keeps showing up on the front page, and my mother will call me. There's another story she's following. So you continually to get the word out. For that, we're very grateful. In your reporting on all these major issues, what would you say are the key gaps that you are observing that pose a challenge to safe, habitable, affordable housing in the state?
First of all, I'm really grateful to Bruce's mom and readers like that for continuing to read this coverage. I think they fall into two broad umbrellas. The first is tenants' rights, which we've heard Amy and Andy talk about already. I've spoken to so many tenants who've, in their experience, felt that all too often, they've got far less power, have far less ability to negotiate, to demand things of their landlord than their landlord has of them. And I think that stems from partly the shortage of affordable rental housing in the state, which means that there are far many more tenants who can fill a unit than there are units available. A recent study from Savvy, from IUPUI, found that for every 10 low-income households, extremely low-income households, there are only 6 available rental units. So all too often, you have tenants living in squalid conditions with little ability to necessarily report it to the health department. There are tenants I've spoken to who have been evicted after reporting severe conditions like mold, infestations, conditions that cause asthma attacks for them. They've been evicted after reporting those issues because their landlord simply chooses not to renew their lease, which they can do. And although there is anti-retaliation protection, as Amy pointed out, the burden is on the tenant to prove it rather than on the landlord. And many legal experts say that makes it much harder for tenants to effectively have protections against safe and habitable housing. Indiana is also one of only about 5 states that doesn't have at least one of 2 basic tenant rights: the right to withhold rent when you have uninhabitable conditions, to pressure the landlord to make those repairs, or the right to make those repairs yourself and thereafter deduct that amount that you paid from your landlord. So there's little teeth for tenants to be able to do that. And I think additionally, tenants, when they end up in eviction court, whether because of not paying rent due to sudden habitability issues or because of the pandemic, they don't have legal representation. Sitting in eviction court, the vast majority of tenants I saw went up representing themselves. One tenant in particular, the tenant who was evicted for reporting the mold to the health department, she represented herself throughout the proceedings in Marion County Small Claims Court and the Superior Court. And she studied the law during her breaks as a bus driver at transit stations. But she lost the case, and she told me she doesn't understand why. But she was up against a lawyer who had represented hundreds of corporate landlords, and the lawyer is a trained professional, and she's just an individual tenant who studies the law in her free time. I think that's one big gap that I've seen. The other big gap is accountability, and the city and state have recently been looking into how they can hold these bad actor landlords accountable. And this is a big challenge because a lot of people have asked, why has a situation like Lakeside Point gone on for 4 years and counting, far longer for other apartment complexes? A lot of these landlords have hundreds, if not thousands, of code enforcement violations against them that go ignored. And they might, the Lakeside Point landlord in particular was called up for instance, a demolition hearing. They simply didn't show up. The hearing had to be rescheduled. So holding these landlords accountable has been a challenge for, I think, both the city and the state. For instance, last summer, the Attorney General tried to file a receivership for Lakeside Point, and you have the top legal officer in the state being unsuccessful in obtaining receivership for that property. And that eventually the property underwent a change in ownership, and that seems to be a direction that the city and state are both trying to move these properties that are managed by irresponsible landlords in that direction. And I think finally the issue of accountability is knowing exactly who these landlords are. Oftentimes we just have a name on property cards and a contact number, but who these individuals actually are and what their strategy is remains a question. And in the recent case of Capitol Place, Berkeley Commons Apartments, you had an absentee landlord that left a water bill unpaid, a $1.3 million water bill that led to tenants losing water for almost an entire day. The city eventually had to step in for that. But the question that's on the forefront of, I believe, the city and advocates and the state's mind right now is how do you hold a landlord like this accountable so that they aren't able to benefit from the city necessarily covering their bills, and also to ensure that tenants don't have to go without water and basic rights again. And finally, I just want to point out that we might be looking at a relatively small group of individuals. An investigation I did with my colleague, Bing Hui at Indy Star, found that there were just 100 landlords who were responsible for 40% of all eviction filings in the first 9 months of 2021. And most of these landlords had a number of health violations. The number 2 and 3 evicting landlords had 440 and more than 1,800 housing violations in that time period each. So looking at those individuals and knowing who they are is definitely an important step toward holding them accountable.
Thank you. So basically, it's the accountability of landlords and actually even knowing who they are. Because you can correct me on this, but I know Lakeside Point and several of the other ones, the owners are actually in Brooklyn, New York. Is that correct?
It's kind of an open question.
Yeah, okay, let's leave it at that. It's not here in town, we'll say that.
Right.
Talking about politicians, Fady, you have been, I'm sorry, I'm supposed to call you Senator, but we've known each other a while. He's Fady. You got involved with Lakeside Point very shortly after you took office. How did that start to impact your view of this and even now some of the things you're starting to do in legislation?
Well, I'll violate the rules and stand up so I can see everyone, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm honored to be with you. I feel at home. It's a blessed Sunday, and I thank each one of you for being here. So many friends, and Jeff from the city and others, thank you for being here. For those of you who don't know, I used to be a homeless person before. And after Hurricane Katrina, my wife and I and our oldest daughter, who was only 3 weeks old, we became homeless and we lost everything. So when I speak about housing issues, I want you to know that I care less about the title. I never ran for public office to be called a state senator. Since we're in a church, it's a good time for confession. I hate politics with a passion. I don't like to be called a politician. I'm a public servant and spent my life in public service. So the issue of housing is near and dear to my heart because I can speak about the experiences of a person who walked in the shoes of a homeless person. I can speak about the agony of not having a roof on top of your head, not having access to child care, not having access to a living wage, not having access to health care. And that's why when I ran for office, I ran on a platform of families first. Because if we protect our families, the nucleus of our society, our communities can be successful. So on the issue of Lakeside specifically, a few weeks after I got elected, Claire and Bruce reached out to me and said, we have this issue in our community. And I'm happy to report to you that I immediately engaged with the Attorney General and formally requested that he files a lawsuit, made the connection with our community and the AG's office, and started that work to be sure that we go after out-of-state negligent landlords who exploit marginalized communities. The court deemed that the AG does not have jurisdiction over the issue because normally Lakeside was registered as a nonprofit organization, which is ironic. I mean, because they claimed that they've taught English as second language and financial literacy once or twice in the past. So Claire and the team in Patchwork, Indy were instrumental in working with the local county, with Marion County, to try to revoke the tax exemption so that we can go after the landlord to recoup some of these property taxes. Then we filed the lawsuit, and the judge deemed that the AG does not have jurisdiction over the matter because it's a nonprofit organization, and the Secretary of State oversees nonprofit organizations in the state of Indiana. So the judge sent the case to mediation. The city does not have, historical legal precedent, strong precedent to stand on to fight against these issues because we are unique in Marion County. We are a consolidated county. So the Department of Public Health is responsible for the inside of an apartment to go in and cite healthcare violations, but the city's Business and Neighborhood Services Agency is responsible for the exterior part of the building, so they can't go in. So that division between local governments of units of government created that also jurisdictional question. And then under state law, the safe building law and the nuisance law, unless a building is vacant, the city can't go and just demolish a building because the living conditions are not appropriate. And then under the nuisance law, the city also was not empowered to go and file a lawsuit to do that. So I appreciate Jeff's leadership and the mayor with the recent cases. They took really courageous action, even though we know that the court system and our judges, with their opinions, they tilt more towards protecting landlords. I'm not going to stand on my soapbox to say why the General Assembly does that, but I'll share with you two specific reasons that I urge you to think about. One, last session I filed a piece of legislation, Senate Bill 230, which for the first time, had it passed, for the first time in the history of our state, it would have granted tenants the ability to withhold rent to fix critical service systems, such as your HVAC, your water, and so on, until the landlord responds to these issues. And the tenant would be able to withhold that portion of the rent to pay for these maintenance requests. And there were other provisions in the law. So basically, landlords tend to complain that they have incompliant and negligent tenants. In this case, all what I'm saying, let the law be fair. Let it be balanced, and let's also respond to negligent and irresponsible and incompliant landlords. And I can tell you, I took pictures from that Patchwork, Indy, and others. I visited the property myself, and we took pictures from inside of the facility, and I appreciate the Indianapolis Star for their amazing coverage on that as well. And I introduced that piece of legislation, and I went to the chair. His name is Jim Buck. And the chair of the committee, his dad used to be a building commissioner. So he deeply cared about that issue. But his caucus didn't want to move it forward. And the first public response from the supermajority was, who did they appoint to respond to my bill? A landlord who was a state legislator, who said, the bill is vague. We're not sure what it does. So the two things that I would like for you to urge you to think about when you talk about legislators and their agendas and what they care about. One, who's funding their campaigns? And then two, the root cause of all public policy problems in Indiana, which is gerrymandering. When you elect people from safe districts that they care less except about a very small group of people to vote for them in the primary, then your voices are not heard. Now, I was able to push forward with my piece of legislation, kept going at it every single day with the chair of the committee, and it was transformed into a summer study committee to study the jurisdictional question. And as recent as last week, Senator Jim Buck and I met to speak with the 4 legislative leaders to ask them to bring all of the experts in this room and other places to work on this issue. It is not right. It is not acceptable. It does not reflect who we are. I'll conclude by sharing with you a couple of things. One, I introduced several pieces of legislation. A couple of them did pass that deal with housing issues, even though we're focused on tenants issues today. But my Senate Bill 236, I've introduced because of assessed value went up during COVID. Some senior citizens on fixed income were kicked out of the property tax credits. So I restored the law by expanding the assessed value. Instead of the threshold being at $200,000, we raised it to almost $240,000, so that if your home value went up and you're a senior citizen and you're fixed income, you will not be kicked out of that $14,400 credit towards your assessed value. And that legislation passed, and now it's part of the law. So now we expanded that. And then there were other pieces of legislation that I was able to pass, including as the main author on Senate Bill 62, which deals with gentrification and with the CDCs, helping local CDCs, community development corporations, to take homes that, instead of being sent to the tax sale, to work with their local owners and the local communities to help owners stay in their places. There was a gentrification bill that we dealt with last session that also had some other mechanisms. So all what I want to tell you is that the issue of housing is near and dear to my heart, whether it's home ownership or tenants. And as I said, it's ironic that a world-famous economist such as Jeffrey Sachs, who published a book titled The Price of Civilization, he's an economist, and he said a society of laws and elections and an economy is not sufficient enough to protect the most vulnerable among us. And he's an economist. And on the other side, you see Dr. King, who was assassinated the day after, or hours after he delivered a speech. Do you remember what was the last event that he attended? It was the strike for the sanitation worker in Memphis. He gave up his life, and his last formal public act, aside from his last speech, was standing up for the most vulnerable in our communities. We can't be praying and promoting faith, and the moment we leave the church or the moment we go to the General Assembly, we neglect our principles, we neglect our values. I don't know what kind of community can we be if we care less about the most vulnerable among us. I don't measure our success by the billionaires and the millionaires. I measure our success by how many beds we keep empty in our jails, and by how many people and families we can help them get to a universal pre-K and child care, and how many tenants can live on a living wage, not just a minimum wage, because they are good at stabilizing minimum wage for decades without change, but living wage that gets adjusted annually, that supports our families. And I can't, accept to be part of a General Assembly. We pray every day before the beginning of session. Every day we pray. You don't see it on the video. For God to help us serve the most vulnerable among us. And then 5 minutes later, we vote against TANF and SNAP and taking benefits away from people. So I urge you to transform your passion, not only to listen to us today. I will bust my behind working for you every day. I will stand up for what is right. I care more about my integrity than winning office. But I urge you to work statewide, even though we live here, with every Republican specifically across the state of Indiana, to understand that we cannot be, we cannot be a compassionate community. We cannot be the Hoosier state that welcomes everyone and loves everyone if we have kids and families suffering that can't even put food on the table or keep a roof on their head or afford health care in our communities. I appreciate you, and I will continue to fight for you.
That's why we invited him. Dee, great to have you here. I think you opened a new center this week. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
We've been hearing from the political side, and Ross Foundation is more about working with the tenant side.
Yeah,
so
grassroots.
Can you kind of tell us a little bit about tenants unions and what kind of results are you seeing so far?
Yeah, so I'm the founder of the Ross Foundation. We oversee the Indianapolis Tenants Rights Union. Housing is an issue in Indiana. We have one of the poorest tenant protection laws in the entire country. And I appreciate this conversation, but to be fair and honest, to be frank, I feel like this conversation and gathering should have happened 30 plus years ago. And we're talking about solidarity. And yes, I reason with what's happening in Lakeside, but situations like this has been happening every single day in black and brown communities for the over half a century. And if we're going to just show up when it's more of a privileged area, then that's an issue that we need to solve within ourselves. When we're talking about solidarity and unifying across the state, because it's becoming a statewide issue, and it's not just becoming an impoverished issue. Because you think about, I grew up born and raised on 42nd and Post Road, and we have one of the highest concentration of low-income Section A apartment complexes. I was evicted unlawfully when I was a young person at 18 years of age, not knowing my rights, didn't know about being overcharged, and I had to go to court by myself. And now it's on my record, right? Now it's off my record, but it took a long time for it to get off my record. I also stayed in a shelter. I also lived in my car. This is the reality of what's happening every single day as we gather. And I just wanted to bring some realness to this gathering today, because as we speak, it's a lot of children who's breathing in mold right now, who has mold and feces and mushrooms growing on their walls. When the ceilings is caved in, when it rains, water is coming down their walls every single day. There's families with no doorknobs. They cannot even lock their doors. Even if you call the health department, it's landlords who live outside of the state who could care less. This is just the reality of what's happening. And so hopefully what's happening with Lakeside We're shining a moment of what's been happening in poor communities all across Indiana for over decades. And I would love to challenge you all in this moment to show solidarity and unify, because without all of us together, we cannot put the word unity back into community. And so that's how we define community.
Can you tell us just a little bit about how you're helping tenants to use their own voices in situations? Absolutely.
So with the Indianapolis Tenants Rights Union, we're teaching people how to organize, how to advocate, but also how to represent themselves. If you think about it, even if we have affordable housing, a lot of tenants that I work with do not even understand how to read a lease. You know, we have to break it down to the fundamentals of the basics. And so what we're doing is housing literacy. We're teaching tenants how to transition from renting to home ownership. We're teaching them how to maintain their property so the property value can stay up in that area, right? We're teaching tenants about discrimination for housing violations. We're teaching them about what to do when retaliation is happening. But we also are teaching them how to fill out letters to the judges, but we also represent as a liaison between tenants and property managers and landlords, because sometimes tenants fear even speaking up because, especially on 42nd and Post Road, they feel like that is their last straw, borderline to living in a shelter or being homeless. And most shelters are overfull, so they have to conform into what some of these slumlords are asking for and requiring. I work with some tenants that pay directly cash value straight to property managers. Wow. They don't even know how to fill out a money order. And then it's a lot of landlords who have so many ridiculous leases out here that is unlawful that we really need to tap into more. And so, you know, one thing we're trying to do is develop a tenant complaint board so we could track a lot of these bad actors, these bad landlords, and these bad property managers. We don't really have a concise system to really hone in who are the bad players in this state of Indiana, and how can we not direct people to them when they need housing, and so that can help alleviate some of the problems, because, as you know, legislation is a holdup. It's a, you know, I mean, I think it's just inhumane that we cannot withhold rent when you're living in inhabitable living conditions. I think you should be able to withhold rent, especially if you're being treated poorly and you have to breathe in mold every single day. And so, yeah, I think one of the key things is home literacy. We have to start teaching them the fundamental of housing so they can understand it, because a lawyer may not always be around. A lot of people cannot afford a lawyer, or pro bono lawyers. We have a small number of them, and so they are overbooked at times. And so what is that tenant is going to do when no one's there to represent them? So we have to start teaching them how to stand up for themselves, how to represent themselves, and making sure they know their rights.
Thank you. Yeah, that's... And I'm just going to say you'll be around afterward if anybody wants to chat.
Yes.
Okay. Don't want to throw you into that, but it seems like there's a lot we could do. And Andrew, I'm going to turn to you. You are intimately involved with legislation. You're involved with coalition building. We have a lot of people here. Some of us, we may understand there are problems. We're, as of today, starting to learn about those problems. But if we're kind of in a 101 affordable housing class, the first time that you and Alex met with Claire and me, you said to us, this is a real long arc, folks. You need to know that. However, your follow-up statement was there are things that we can start doing right now, as we're hearing from these people that are up here with us. If you're talking to people about how to begin to address these things in their own local situations, by themselves or with groups, congregations, whatever it might be, what does that start to look like?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Bruce. And again, thanks to everybody who's been part of this and for everybody who came here today on this Sunday afternoon. If you're like me, There's been so much good information. I do this every day, and I'm scribbling down new things and thinking about how can I put this together. So what I want to talk with you about very briefly, because I know we're getting here towards the end, is what you can do now and then what you can be thinking about for the long term. Folks here who are Colts fans, you might remember Tony Dungy. His philosophy, if you remember, was talk about stacking wins. And so that's what we want to do, is to stack wins with what can we do in the short term and make that go higher so that we can get bigger and better wins in the future. So one thing you can do here today is just make sure, take advantage of the tables that you have around here. I want to point to my colleague Michaela, who drove up here from Columbus, Indiana. My organization has a couple of flyers here. Though, selfishly, what I'd really like you to do is to find down here at the bottom of the sheet and sign up for updates from Prosperity, Indiana, but also Housing for Hoosiers, which is the site of the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition. You've heard Dee is on our steering committee for the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition. Amy's on the steering committee for the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition. And then it takes partnerships with groups like Patchwork, Indy, with Second Presbyterian, with the folks up with the Methodist Church who are interested in this. There should not be one single door to get involved with this. So don't feel like you should only be going through one individual place. Please sign up and get the information from people all around the table. So when you do that, then you'll be the first to be in line with the work that we're doing to help bring some of the organizers together on this. We are planning this week, after the event that was referenced earlier this week, there's a new report from the Notre Dame Student Policy Network that talked about the health outcomes that happen when you don't have the habitability standards that we've been talking about. When Indiana is one of those few states that doesn't have that ability to withhold rent or to repair and deduct. We're seeing poor health outcomes because of that. You also see poor economic outcomes because of that. So again, sign up, because this week we decided, after that report release, we're going to do a letter that's going to urge the legislative leaders to choose Senator Qaddoura's study and select that. So in this room, we have been really blessed to have some of the top journalists, some of the top organizers, some of the top community organizers in Indianapolis and in the state. The problem is that to make statewide momentum and to stack those wins, we can't just have this group. We can't just have Indianapolis. We need to get people from Marion County to be talking to your friends in Marion. We need the people in Lawrence to talk to your friends in Lawrence County. We need you to call up your friends and family in Carmel and in Martinsville and in Kokomo, in the places that are in the districts where the decision makers for the state live. And we need them to be active in this too. If you're a Presbyterian, we need to activate the Presbyterians throughout the state. My dad's a United Methodist minister. We need to get all the Methodists behind this. We need to get all the different faith groups and interest groups here together. So that's basically my short pitch is sign up now. Make sure that you are clued in on what's happening in the short term. And some of us are doing some of that organizing, and we need your help, and we need to get your ideas about the organizing you're doing as well. And then also make sure that you're reaching out to your legislators. If you are lucky enough to have Senator Qaddoura as your legislator, you know he's on it, and he is leading this issue. But we need you to be making sure that you have that relationship. And something else that I'll say is make sure to vote. May 3rd is primary election. Go and look, no matter what side, which of those ballots that you'll be picking up, look at those candidates. Do they mention these issues we're talking about today? If they don't, there's still some time. Call them up. Call up their headquarters, or go to one of the forums that they're having, and make sure that this is an issue that they are going to be committed to. And then make sure you come back in November and apply that as well.
Thank you so much. I will say the first time that I reached out to Amy Nelson to start talking about her role in this summit, within 30 seconds she said to me, we have to get the religious communities. And that led on to a conversation about coalition building, which has turned into a bigger conversation about we can't just have this meeting this afternoon with all these people and say, hey, it was fun, it was real, we'll see you. So I want to let you know that we are looking at a second summit regarding coalition building. We're looking at a third summit. Judith Thomas and I had a conversation. Amy has also mentioned you can't talk about housing. Dee, you brought it up already. You can't talk about housing without talking about race. So that will be a third summit. We are planning to try to begin to build knowledge, awareness, and coalition, because one of Andrew's first comments to us was, if you're going to affect Marion County, you have to affect everybody outside of Marion County. That's how state legislation works. Fady knows this all too well. So be looking, I'm going to say Nora Neighborhood Ambassadors.org. Is that right? Where a lot of this information was. I know also there are connections on Second Prez's page, Patchwork Indy's website, and that kind of stuff. But we see this as a beginning, not just a one-time event, and we are looking to begin to build momentum because, as Dee said, these things have been going on for decades in our state. Some of us are a little late getting to the game, but we certainly want to get involved in ways that we can. So I would ask you to join me in thanking all four of our panelists for the great work they're doing in so many areas. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Well, that concludes our summit. I would like to encourage you to stay afterwards and to network and to meet some of our panelists and our speakers and continue the conversation. We also have a fabulous array of tables. We have a church here that has been engaged in eviction watches. If you're looking to get engaged, you can please go to their table. But thank you, and please, again, sign up for the listserv, visit the Nora Neighborhood Ambassadors website, and we really hope that this is the first of many, many conversations to come. Thank you.